I still remember how that gun felt against my head that night. Cold steel pressed into my temple so hard I could feel the little front sight digging into my skin, and this deputy leaning in so close I could smell stale coffee and cigarettes on his breath as he hissed, "You move that hand and I'll blow your brains out right here, boy." To him, I was just a black trucker on a lonely back road, some nobody in a tired rig who would never be believed over a sheriff's report. And what he did next, slipping a little bag of white powder into my door while the barrel stayed on my skull. He did like he'd practiced it 100 times. What he didn't know was that the truck driver he thought he was framing and maybe burying before sunrise was actually Special Agent Andre Miles from the Department of Justice wearing a federal chest camera under that faded flannel shirt, and that little camera was about to rip his whole world open. That was the night everything in a tiny place called Gray Ridge, Nebraska started to come apart. Gray Ridge is the kind of town you miss if you blink on the highway. One gas station, one diner, one church whose steeple leans like it's tired of holding itself up. And the first time I rolled my 18-wheeler down Main Street, you could feel the air tighten. Porch conversations cut off mid-word people on the sidewalk suddenly got very interested in their shoes. The women in the diner window froze with their coffee halfway up, and every eye followed my truck like I had sirens on. You know what I mean? That thick quiet where you realize you just became the story. On paper, I was hauling farm equipment, just another driver with road dust on his boots and a cap pulled low. But the real reason I was there started 3 years earlier when another agent, Daniel Hines, disappeared near a patch of woods outside town called Miller Hollow. They found his sedan on a dirt road, blood on the gravel boot prints heading into the trees, and then nothing. No body, no witnesses, just a whole town that suddenly didn't remember anything unusual. And after a while, the file cooled, like a lot of files do when they bump up against the wrong people. I asked for that case because it would not let go of me, maybe because I grew up watching my own brother get slammed onto the hood of a squad car for matching a description, while our neighbors hid behind curtains, maybe because I'd read too many reports that ended in words like confusion and unclear circumstances. But once I started digging, I saw something our analysts had started flagging too. A symbol that kept popping up in different investigations. A circle split straight down the middle with a short line like a crack. A halo somebody had hit with a hammer showing up in gun cases on extremist boards and in 2 grainy photos from Miller Hollow, right before Hines vanished. Same mark in different towns, which meant somebody out there wasn't freelancing. They were building something. And by the time my truck crossed into Gray Ridge, that cracked halo was riding in the back of my mind like extra weight. My first stop was the gas station, because if you want to understand a town, you watch Who's Welcome, where the coffee is burnt, and the lottery tickets hang by the register. I grabbed a bottle of water, walked up to the counter, and the man behind it looked me over from boots to skin, like he was measuring a problem, then said flat as a dead battery, "We're closed." I glanced at the neon sign humming open in the window and answered calm, "Sign says 9. He barely shrugged, chin-ticking toward the door. "Sign's wrong. We don't want trouble tonight." He didn't have to say what kind of trouble he saw when he looked at me, so I just nodded and walked out, already knowing exactly where I stood in the local food chain. A few miles out of town, past the last rusted trailer and an old boarded-up gas pump, sat Logan's Storage, nothing but chain link and stacked shipping containers, if you believe the paperwork. But our intel said it was one of those places where trucks came in heavy and left light with no invoices in between. So that's where I parked my rig the first night, 100 yards down the road with the lights off, engine ticking as it cooled chest camera on little microphone taped under the cab, picking up every crunch of gravel in the dark. Around midnight, an old Chevy Blazer rolled up and flashed its headlights twice, the exact pattern our tech guys had pulled from encrypted chats, and the gate slid open like it had been waiting. Men stepped out under weak yellow floodlights, moving like they owned every inch of that dirt, and Sheriff Calvin Rudd climbed out last big frame white hat, cigarette hanging off his lip, walking with that slow, loose confidence you see in small-town sheriffs who've been called Sir for 30 years. Beside him were his deputies, Mark Knox with the buzz cut and the little permanent smirk, and Eli Hart, lean and quiet, scanning the tree line like a man who'd carried a rifle in another country. Pickups eased in and out, tailgates dropped, crates moved from truck beds into containers with no clipboards. No questions, just that smooth rhythm of people who don't expect to be interrupted. And when one crate hit the light, I saw it burned into the wood, that same cracked halo from Hines's file staring back at me from the middle of Nebraska. My stomach doing that slow twist it does when the thing you prayed was wrong turns out dead right, while my hands stayed steady on the camera, catching faces, plates, timestamps, the symbol, pushing it all through our encrypted channel and back in DC. Somebody started waking supervisors up. By about 3 in the morning, the yard went quiet. Engines faded toward town, and Rudd stood at the gate, finishing one last cigarette like a king looking over his field. I was just starting to think about bad coffee and a stiff neck when my whole truck shuddered from someone pounding on the door. "Sheriff's office, open up hands where we can see them," a voice yelled, and I knew that bored, sharp tone before I saw his face. Knox. I took one breath, reminded myself I was not that scared kid on the sidewalk anymore, and opened the door with my hands up. His flashlight hit me in the eyes, he saw my face, and that little smile slid into place. "Well, look at that," he said. "Black trucker sleeping next to our storage yard. Real subtle." Eli stood a step behind him, beam drifting over my plates. "You got ID?" Knox asked. "Left pocket," I said slow. "I'm reaching for it now." I barely moved before cold steel smashed into the side of my head and the barrel of his Glock jammed into my temple. "Don't reach," he whispered, breath hot with coffee and cigarettes. "You move that hand and this ends right here." Everything went still. I could hear my own heartbeat and the quiet scuff of Eli's boots, and out of the corner of my eye I saw his radio slip from his belt, hit the dirt, and while Knox kept that gun locked on me, Eli bent down and in the same motion tucked a small plastic bag into the seam of my door, where most drivers would never see it quick, and practiced like they'd done it before. They were planting dope on a man whose real crime was being black and too close to their business, and for a second I wanted to slap that gun away and let the whole thing blow up. But the part of me wearing the badge under my shirt knew one dead truck driver on a gravel road would just become another line on a form, and Hines would stay lost in the trees, so I stayed put. "I'm not reaching," I said steady. "You asked for my wallet. I'm telling you where it is." His finger hovered on the trigger long enough for my mouth to taste metal, and then another voice cut through from behind, rough and annoyed. "Holster the gun, Knox," Sheriff Rudd called. "He's just a driver. Just a driver." They hauled me into town anyway, into the old garage they called a station, and Knox started punching charges into a computer like his hand knew the list by heart. Illegal parking, suspicious behavior, possible narcotics, failure to comply. And I said at once, calm, I was set up. He looked up, smirked, and said, "Then prove it unless you really do have some secret camera under that ugly shirt." The thing about a man who's been dirty a long time is he cannot imagine proof that doesn't belong to him. He truly believed whatever he typed on that form would be the only story that mattered. When they finally uncuffed me and slid my stuff across the counter, Eli stepped in close like he was just handing back my keys and whispered, "You park by Logan again. You disappear like that other Fed. Miller Hollow still has room." Yeah, that happened. I walked out, climbed into my truck, locked the doors, let my hands shake in the dark where nobody could see, and then did the one thing they had not planned for. I hit upload. Every second of it, the gun, the plant, the threats, the crates with the cracked halo went straight to my team, and the message I got back a few minutes later was short and heavy. Confirmed, symbol matches, audio links them to Hines. Stay on Gray Ridge, full op inbound, do not break cover. The next night I wasn't parked by a fence. I was in Miller Hollow with wet leaves under my boots, crouched behind a tree while Rudd's Blazer rolled into a clearing with 2 pickups and a box truck with no plates. And from the dark I watched them crack the doors and unload rifles, ammo, and crates stamped with that same cracked halo. Listened to Rudd talk about being ready when the country tears itself apart. And Knox joke about cleaning up anyone who asked questions while Eli moved like a man who'd cleared houses before. Then Eli froze, lifted his light and said, "There's someone out there." And when his beam slid across the trees and stopped just feet from my face, I had my hand on my gun and a choice to make. Save myself in one loud second, or save the case Hines had died chasing. One shot, and by sunrise the story would be, federal agent kills local deputy in the dark, and those crates would be gone to another town. So I pressed against the bark and hoped the woods gave him something else. And sure enough, a deer crashed through brush off to my right, branches snapping, and Eli swung toward the noise and muttered, "Just a deer," almost like he was trying to talk his instincts down. In my earpiece, my commander came through, calm. "Birds inbound, Andre, you give us the word." And when I saw Rudd start closing crates, I said, "If you're coming, come now." A moment later, the sky exploded with rotor wash searchlights cut through the branches and a loudspeaker shook the clearing. "This is the United States government. Drop your weapons and get on your knees." One of Rudd's men grabbed a rifle and two of ours dropped him so fast his gun skidded across the dirt. Knox fired wild into the dark. Eli dove for cover. Rudd shouted orders. Nobody followed anymore. And in the middle of it, my commander said, "Spotlight on Miles, he's our witness." A beam peeled away and lit up my tree, and I stepped out with branches in my jacket and my badge heavy under my shirt, walking into that white circle like I'd been walking toward it for 3 years. Rudd squinted up at me, and I watched the exact second it hit him that the sleepy driver he'd brushed past at the station was the reason his wrists were chained. "You," he said, choking on the word, "you're that trucker." And I held my badge where his men and our cameras could see it and answered calm, Special Agent Andre Miles. I was never just a driver, and you were never just keeping this town safe. Months later, in a federal courtroom, they played the audio my little mic had caught, and the whole room heard Rudd's own voice calm like he was talking about weather, saying, "If that trucker comes back, deal with him like we dealt with that other Fed. Miller Hollow still has room." And you could feel the air change like a lie. The town had been leaning on finally snapped. Heinz's mother sat in the front row with a folded flag in her lap, his sister next to her gripping the bench, and behind them were people from Grey Ridge who'd voted for Rudd and waved at him in parades, now watching the man they called sheriff listen to his own words put him in a cage. Once someone pulled the right files, the rest came out quick. Eli's boots matched prints from the night Heinz vanished. Knox's bank account showed cash his paycheck couldn't explain, old lost complaints lined up into a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. And under that weight, the tough act cracked. Eli suddenly stood up in the middle of his testimony and blurted, "We didn't mean to kill him," Rudd said. "Scare him off. Said nobody would ever dig into Grey Ridge." And Knox, red and shaking, jabbed a finger at his old boss and said, "We were following orders. You think we came up with this?" The judge never raised his voice. He just read it out. 30 years in federal prison for Sheriff Calvin Rudd, no parole, 22 for Eli Hart, 14 for Mark Knox. And nobody clapped. Nobody cheered. There was just this heavy silence where a town finally understood the man they trusted had been using their fear as a business plan. I stayed in Grey Ridge a few more months to help rebuild and to listen to stories that had never made it into reports, women who tried to file assault complaints and ended up humiliated in Knox's office, a restaurant owner who paid fees so inspections would stop crushing his weekends, a veteran on crutches who told me Eli once stood on his porch and said, "You keep asking about your nephew's case, and this town might forget where your house is if a fire starts." And by the time we finished digging through dusty boxes with Rudd's initials on them, I knew Grey Ridge wasn't some cursed dot on the map. It was just what happens when people decide looking away is easier than speaking up. Before I left, our new acting chief, Carla Nguyen, dropped an old warehouse photo on my desk, a crate in the corner tagged with that same cracked halo years before Rudd ever wore a badge, and said, "This didn't start with him. He just plugged into it." And a week later, a secure file hit my inbox labeled Project Rise with a map of the country and 5 little red dots, Grey Ridge marked as one we'd just torn open. 4 more towns out there with their own sheriffs, their own Miller Hollows, their own people telling themselves everything is fine. So let me throw this back to you because I really do want to hear it. If you lived in a place like Grey Ridge and started noticing the same names always getting a pass, the same kind of people always getting pulled over, complaints that just go missing, would you speak up and risk becoming the next target, or would you tell yourself it's not your business and hope the storm never hits your house? You know what I mean? Do you think Grey Ridge was just unlucky enough to have one bad sheriff? Or was the town itself part of the problem because people chose silence over truth for so long? And is 30 years really enough for someone who turned a badge into a weapon and a forest into a graveyard? Tell me in the comments what side you think you would actually land on if this was your home. Tell me if you've ever seen anything like this up close, because guys like Rudd don't stay in power because they're smart. They stay there because everybody else decides that looking away feels safer than standing up. And the only reason I'm here telling you this instead of being a name on a cold case wall is that this time finally somebody hit record and refused to back down.